Not only are we going to get an economic statement at the end of this month on the 30th, but each one of us is going to get a $200 check from Premier Ford. And in fact, everybody in the house is going to get one. I'm just going to put it out there, and considering your first reaction, Kathleen, give me a sense of, where you stand on all of this.
Well, it's pretty blatant electioneering as far as I'm concerned, Dave. This is a government that's still in deficit, although I suspect that when the fall economic statement comes out, we will see magically that a lot of that deficit has disappeared. So I suspect that the finances of the province are in better shape than they were projected to be. So that's good. Except that if that's the case, then giving everybody in the province $200 really makes no economic sense. It just makes no sense to me. If this were a means tested rebate or check that were going out, you could probably make an argument for that. I mean, it is a time of year when people are struggling and struggle even more. And there are lots of people who could use some extra cash. I get that. But there are lots of people who don't need $200. And this is the same challenge I had with the $200 check that I got from Mike Harris. And, that was kind of at the beginning of my political career. It was so outrageous to me that money that could have been used for other things in the province that are desperately needed, it was not being used. So $3.2 billion. There's a lot of good that could be done in the province for that amount of money. This is the run up to an election. That's what it feels like to me.
Well, it sure does, and I think all of us would agree. But on the other hand, Tim, if you actually go back to the funding that the Harris government handed out, I think there are going to be people who will tell you, well, yeah, I spent that money in the economy, and so I put that money to work. We can argue as to whether or not that's more beneficial in the short term, but we're still running a huge deficit. If nothing else, whether there was better places to spend the money, where did the fiscal conservatives go in this province?
I really have two lines of thought on this, Dave. So here's thought one. And when I put in my pointy head economist hat, sort of the conservative thought that I would bring to the table is, first, I'd like to see some of the debt pay down. For good reason. Accumulate a lot of debt through COVID to keep things afloat. If we have some extra revenue, let's start paying that down. And then if we were to target a tax, I would look at income taxes and business taxes, because I believe that means that people will work harder, they'll invest in the economy, will create jobs and better economic growth. That's the pointy tipped hat there. Here's the other school of thought. I do think that the Premier Ford is keeping the door open for an early election. And, to avoid what happened to David Peterson, where he called the early election and lost, I think he needs two things. One, not a surprise. So you socialize it early. People are talking about it. And secondly, you need to actually have a case of your mandate. Here's my plan, right? My investments in infrastructure, my investments in keeping communities safe, and a rebate like this one. To work, you need the other parties all to be on the opposite side of the argument. So I see this as part of a package of how Ford could get an additional mandate in 2025. Bottom line is, well, I've got one point of view. Doug Ford has done this before with an education rebate. He cut the gas tax, the licensing renewal for our cars, a very high-level tax breaks for ordinary Canadians. So my point is, I lost my election. He won his. So maybe he's on to something.
Well, even when they made the announcement, John, about the upcoming economic statement, the finance minister sounded like a campaign ad himself.
We're investing in infrastructure, building roads, highways, hospitals, schools, transit, and homes. We're cutting red tape and keeping taxes low to make Ontario one of the best places to invest.
So, that's not a surprise that that's the tone we're going to get. But he actually kind of laid out in terms of, what it is we've already done, what it is we intend to do moving forward. Can there be too much on this plate at once? That is to say, can there be too many things that we can point to or criticize, either or, that becomes something of a distraction rather than a focused, here's what you're going to get from a Ford government?
Well, I think a little bit like Tim, I'm of two minds on this. The first thing is, when you're in the off season before an election campaign, there is a lot on your plate, and therefore it's not really going to have that much of an effect to add an extra setting. I think when you take a look at this government, they're sitting comfortably at 44%, 42 to 44% in the polls, and they've been able to do that even though they've got a number of controversies under their belt. The second thing, however, is that if this is a prelude to an election campaign, then it becomes a much more sharp end of the stick. The campaign is fashioned around certain phrases and certain things that they're going to do. And as a result of being in the driver's seat, the government has a way in which they can focus that agenda very, very carefully. So let's say that this government decides that it wants to go to the polls in the spring. Now is laying the groundwork for that. And part of it is giving out the money to people to put in their pockets.
Well, Keith, part of the reporting on this has suggested that not only will we hear about the $200 a person for this, which becomes the headline, and maybe the distraction and other things that are in the economic statement, i.e., what will the deficit be? What are we going to project, and where's that money going to come from? But Colin DeMello at Global suggesting that we might find out what the booze deal actually costs us. Maybe we'll see more costing around Therme. I mean, we've already had the big reveal last week. So, is there an opportunity to kind of bury some of those bad news stories with the effect of this shiny, here's $200 in your pocket?
Well, the $200 it's going to work. I think fiscally it's pretty reckless, but politically it's pretty astute, especially when you're keying people up for an early spring election a year ahead of schedule. And you're going to give out these checks in January and February. When Mike Harris gave out those $200 checks, he was in a surplus situation, not a $10 billion deficit, although I suspect, as Kathleen pointed out, in the fall economic statement, it'll come in much lower. But this is a $3 billion plus hit to the fiscal books. So it's going to be, the deficit's not going to be wiped out by any chance. So they're giving this money out in a deficit. Back to when Harris did it, I used to do some lectures at J schools, and I would often take along some Canadian Press style guides, and I'd auction them off to the kids with quizzes. And one of my questions would be, name me a cabinet minister other than the premier. And invariably it was like pulling teeth. Even though they would be like, third year students ready to graduate, they didn't know the cabinet at all. Except for the year they all got $200 checks, and the arms just went straight up. Ernie Eves is our treasurer, because Ernie Eves signed those checks. It works. There's nothing like giving people $200, especially in January and February when the Christmas bills are rolling in. Politically, it's going to work for them. Although fiscally, to Dave's question, whatever happened to the fiscal conservatives in Ontario, I think they look at this as sort of, a cost of doing business. And you're absolutely buying people with their own money, buying their votes with their own money.
So isn't that, an interesting juxtaposition then, Tim, when we look at the money that's going back into your pocket from the province, and that hasn't happened yet, but presumably based on what Rob Benzi's saying is going to happen. The federal government, on the other hand, I think the carbon tax rebate is going into your bank account, if not this week, then soon. But the feds just can't seem to get any traction, to point to Keith's point, in terms of it feeling like this is a great thing for me.
Yeah, the carbon tax is a different animal altogether, because you pay, every time at the pump or for your home heating and such. And most people will be dubious of any government that they're going to get that or more back. I don't think they buy that. Yeah, we get the checks in the mail, but it also reminds us that every time we go to the pump, it's 17 cents a liter more because of the carbon tax. I was one who voted for the $200 rebate when we were in surplus back in 2000. If I had known it would buy lawn signs for Kathleen Wynne, I might have had a second guess about actually saying yes to that. But this is real money, right? I mean, talking a family of four, for example, $800, highly visible in an era of affordability. So while a line of economists, might give it the thumbs down, man, this sort of thing connects, and it connected back in 2000. An affordability crisis, likely even more.
Yeah, well, and I think that will be the buzz. I mean, clearly that's the sort of that kitchen table, to John's point, eye level discussion that you're going to be able to have around, the money that's coming in. Where am I going to spend it? And if it turns into more Christmas gifts for the kids or paying down the credit cards, either way, it's probably hard to fight.